Every collapse is remembered as a tragedy, but that is only half the truth. Because every collapse is also a redistribution, not of morality or intelligence or effort, but of position, and when systems fail, they do not fail evenly, they fracture along pre-existing fault lines that determine who absorbs the losses and who quietly emerges stronger. Not because of conspiracy or secret coordination, but because of structure. When a currency weakens, everything priced in that currency is repriced, slowly at first and then all at once. And those who hold the currency absorb the loss, while those who hold assets tied to real value or denominated outside the system are insulated, with no laws broken and no villains required, only arithmetic rebalancing itself. Which is why Stage 5 and Stage 6 feel so profoundly unfair, as the system continues to preach discipline while punishing savers, turning cash into a liability, fixed income into a trap, and patience into a disadvantage. While debt, paradoxically, becomes an advantage simply because it is owed in a weakening unit. History is unambiguous about this pattern. From Rome's collapsing denarius that rewarded landholders and crushed wage earners, to Weimar Germany, where factories, property, and foreign currency survived while savings evaporated, to Britain's long stagnation after reserve status faded, where asset holders adapted and the middle class quietly paid the price, revealing a consistency that is not cruel but mechanical, and exposing the most dangerous lie of late-stage empires, the promise of protection. Because once fiscal dominance takes hold, governments cannot protect purchasing power without destroying the system they rely on, leaving only delay, and delay always favors those who move first. This realization is deeply uncomfortable, because it strips away the illusion that elections, policies, or personalities can reverse what is fundamentally a structural endgame, bringing Venezuela back into focus not as a victory, but as a buffer. Since Stage 4 resource acquisition extends timelines without fixing causes, raising stakes rather than restoring balance. While internally, the rules begin to change through creeping taxes, normalized surveillance, quiet capital controls, and compliance replacing consent, all signs of fragility rather than strength. As the wealth transfer unfolds gradually through inflation erosion, policy distortion, asset repricing, and behavioral shifts, until, by the time collapse becomes obvious, the transfer is already complete. Which is why history rewards early recognition, not panic or rebellion, but understanding. Because understanding the cycle is not about withdrawing from society or predicting dates. It is about positioning based on probability rather than certainty, forcing the final and most uncomfortable question: what does seeing this cycle clearly allow you to do now? While the system still functions, before the end of an empire becomes visible to everyone else. Collapse almost never begins with chaos or spectacle. It begins quietly, politely, and invisibly. When people stop believing, not in governments or speeches, but in the simple assumption that tomorrow will be better than today. A shift that never shows up first in polls or headlines, but in behavior. Because confidence is the unseen infrastructure of every economic system. Impossible to legislate or quantify, yet once it weakens, nothing works the same way again. And once it breaks completely, no force can restore it. This is why Stage 5 of the imperial cycle feels sudden in hindsight, but unfolds gradually in real time. Defined not by statistics but by psychology, as inflation stops being an abstract number and becomes a daily experience that changes how people live, buying sooner, saving less, taking on debt just to stand still, losing faith that discipline will be rewarded, until money no longer functions as a store of value but as a melting ice cube. A perception that feeds on itself as savings feel like punishment, cash feels risky, and long-term planning turns into guesswork. Not because people declare a loss of confidence, but because they adapt quietly, saying they should buy now, can't afford to wait, or will deal with it later. Governments respond with denial, redefinition, and reassurance, insisting inflation is temporary, debt manageable, growth strong, but arithmetic ignores narratives. And as asset owners see nominal values rise while wage earners fall behind, creating the illusion that some are winning even as the system degrades, until social trust fractures not between classes but between effort and outcome, as those who worked hard and followed the rules fall behind anyway. Resentment replaces optimism and politics turns inward, trading analysis for blame and problem-solving for polarization. Meanwhile, capital moves quietly and efficiently. Reserves diversify, alternative systems expand, gold accumulates. Not as rebellion, but precaution, because markets don't warn, they reposition. And the most dangerous feature of this stage is that everything still feels fixable. Institutions still function in form, growth still exists on paper. Even as legitimacy disappears beneath the surface, forcing the system toward stage 6, fiscal dominance, where monetary independence quietly dies, the moment every decision is filtered through whether higher interest rates are affordable, trapping central banks into managing survival rather than stability, holding rates artificially low, rolling debt indefinitely, and stalling rather than optimizing. A phase history shows no empire escapes intact as inflation, eroding trust, rising control, falling productivity, and expanding debt locked together into a terminal feedback loop. From there, collapse does not arrive as a single event, but as a reset, through currency failure in one form or another, vaporizing wealth stored in the failing system, while preserving or magnifying wealth anchored in real assets, not as punishment but as mechanics, a transfer not from poor to rich but from the unaware to the prepared. Because empires decay long before they fall, and decay is far harder to recognize than destruction, leaving only one question that matters before the reset arrives. What does understanding the cycle allow you to do while there is still time? There are moments in history that barely register when they occur. Quiet, procedural moments buried in technical language and forgotten headlines, yet years later are recognized as the exact point where everything began to change. And January 3, 2026 may prove to be one of them, because at 2:01 a.m., without speeches, declarations, or public drama, American helicopters landed in Caracas. And within 30 minutes, Nicolas Maduro was in custody, while control over roughly $17.3 trillion in proven oil reserves quietly shifted hands, an event that appeared to most Americans as just another distant intervention, but in reality had little to do with Venezuela, and even less to do with oil, and everything to do with what empires do when they begin losing control of their currency, their credibility, and their future, long before collapse becomes visible. Because when the symbolism is stripped away, the pattern is unmistakable. Empires in decline stop acting strategically and start acting urgently. And urgency is the first external sign of desperation. The United States now carries $38.5 trillion in national debt, growing by more than $6 billion per day, with annual interest payments exceeding $1 trillion for the first time and rivaling the entire defense budget, while simultaneously witnessing the largest voluntary migration of private wealth in history as over 142,000 millionaires quietly relocate, not from war or famine, but from risk itself, a combination that has appeared repeatedly across centuries and has never ended well, marking the transition into the most dangerous phase of the imperial life cycle, Stage 4. Every late-stage empire tells itself the same comforting story, that this time is different. That new technology, smarter institutions, better data, and faster systems have rewritten the rules of history, but that belief is precisely what makes the danger greater now rather than smaller. Because technology does not alter the mathematics of debt, it only delays the consequences. And the United States is now trapped not by debt itself, but by interest, with $38.5 trillion in obligations, behaving less like a number and more like a gravitational force that pulls policy, markets, and politics into its orbit. For decades, this burden felt manageable for one simple reason: interest rates kept falling, making debt service cheaper, borrowing painless, and growth appear endless, creating the illusion of control. Yet rates cannot fall forever, and once interest payments crossed $1 trillion annually in 2025, they ceased to be a background cost and became a binding constraint that competes directly with defense, healthcare, social security, infrastructure, and education, while producing nothing of value in return, only transferring wealth from taxpayers to creditors. Worse, the character of borrowing has changed over time, shifting from productive investment towards sustaining consumption, asset inflation, and political promises, allowing GDP to rise even as productivity slowed, wages stagnated, and wealth concentrated, the unmistakable signature of a mature debt cycle, which history shows can end in only three ways: austerity, default, or inflation. The first politically suicidal, the second credibility destroying, leaving inflation as the path of least resistance. Yet inflation is not a tool, but a fire, and once debt reaches this scale, Central banks lose true independence as higher rates threaten fiscal survival, triggering the feedback loop known as fiscal dominance, where monetary policy serves debt maintenance rather than price stability, a condition that has never been reversed once it begins. The contradictions are now visible everywhere. Rates rise and debt service explodes. Rates fall and inflation resurfaces, leaving no stable equilibrium, only oscillation, which markets sense long before governments admit it, explaining why capital flight begins quietly through strategic repositioning rather than panic. As wealth follows its oldest instinct, survival. This is why Stage 4 is always accompanied by elite migration, and why reserve currency status offers leverage but not immunity, as trust slowly erodes. Foreign governments diversify reserves, build parallel systems, and hedge exposure, not out of hostility but precaution, ensuring that reserve dominance fades through dilution rather than collapse. As financial options narrow, external behavior grows more aggressive, with resource acquisition, sanctions, and military presence substituting for economic persuasion, projecting strength even as internal foundations weaken. Because Stage 4 feels powerful to the public while debt compounds, interest grows, and trust continues to decay beneath the surface, making Stage 5 inevitable. Not through announcements or ceremonies, but through daily life as prices rise. Savings feel unsafe, planning becomes impossible. Social cohesion fractures psychologically before it ever does violently. And confidence, once lost, refuses to return, marking the point where history stops issuing warnings and begins recording consequences.